It's really hard to comprehend that your own mother could do something like this to your own child.
Felony, guilty of possession of a firearm in the commission of a felony.
I just know that my son is in heaven, and that's a place that she'll never see.
Jonathan Hoffman was 17 years old, 5 feet 6 inches tall, and weighed 110 pounds. On the evening of May 18, 2012, he was in his grandparents' condominium on Brookview Lane in West Bloomfield Township, Michigan, wearing athletic shorts and socks. He had no shoes on. He had made plans to see a friend later that night. At 5:27 p.m., he called 911 and told the dispatcher he had been shot. "My grandma shot me," he said. "I'm going to die. Help." He was already wrong about one thing. He wasn't going to die yet. His grandmother would come back and make sure of that. Sandra Layne was 74 years old at the time of the shooting, a former schoolteacher with fading red hair and a slight frame. She and her husband Fred, who was in his 80s, had taken Jonathan into their home the previous year while his parents dealt with a family crisis in Arizona. Jonathan's parents, Michael Hoffman and Jennifer Hoffman, had recently divorced and relocated out of state. Their younger daughter Jessica, 16, was being treated for a brain tumor. Jonathan had 1 year of high school left. He enrolled at Farmington Central High School and moved into the West Bloomfield condo. The arrangement was practical. It also put a 17-year-old with a growing drug problem inside the home of a woman in her mid-70s who had no backup. Jonathan's legal history was straightforward. He had been pulled over and found with marijuana. While on probation for that offense, he was stopped again and found to have Adderall. A prior drug incident had landed him in the hospital. He was on active probation when he moved in with his grandparents. The probation required regular drug testing. Layne was aware of all of it. She had conversations with his probation officer. She knew he was using synthetic marijuana, sold under names like K2 and Spice, and she communicated her concerns to his parents. His parents, dealing with their daughter's treatment, did not take him back to Arizona. The situation stayed as it was. By spring 2012, the tension in the condo had escalated to a documented point. On March 21, 2012, 8 weeks before the shooting, Layne called 911. She told the dispatcher that Jonathan was very upset, yelling, and behaving threateningly. Officers responded. No arrests were made. Layne later said that this incident and Jonathan's general behavior led her to purchase a handgun. In April 2012, she bought a Glock 17, a 9mm semi-automatic pistol. She loaded it with hollow point ammunition. She practiced at a shooting range in the weeks before the killing. She later told the court she bought the gun because she feared Jonathan's friends, who she said came to the house at late hours and whose intentions she distrusted. She said she was afraid they might rob her and Fred of their valuables. On May 18th, Jonathan Hoffman tested positive for synthetic marijuana at a court-ordered probation check. He returned to the condo that afternoon. Prosecutors established that earlier in the day, Layne told Fred to take the dog for a walk. Fred left. Layne and Jonathan were alone in the condominium. What happened next is partly established by physical evidence, partly by Layne's own testimony, and most critically by a 911 recording that became the centerpiece of the trial. Layne said they argued. She said Jonathan demanded her car keys and cash, claiming he intended to flee the area before his probation violation could be processed into a formal consequence. She said he threatened her and kicked her in the stomach. She said she retrieved the Glock and fired. The first shots hit Jonathan. He was struck multiple times. He was not dead. He managed to get upstairs to the loft where the couch was, and he called 911. Prosecutors pointed out that Jonathan was wearing just shorts and socks and had plans to see a friend that evening, not the clothing or demeanor of someone preparing to run. They noted there were no documented injuries on Layne consistent with being kicked or struck. When she was briefly taken to the hospital for evaluation after her arrest, she told an officer there that Jonathan had not harmed her. At the police station, her account changed. She said he had kicked her. The 911 call Jonathan placed at 5:27 p.m. ran for several minutes. The dispatcher stayed on the line with him. At some point during the call, with the dispatcher still connected and Jonathan still talking, Sandra Layne came back. The tape captured what followed. Jonathan was shot again. He was pleading for help when it happened. The dispatcher heard it in real time. Investigators recovered 9 spent cartridge casings from the condominium. Layne had pulled the trigger 10 times. 6 rounds struck Jonathan, 3 in the chest, 2 in the back, and 1 additional wound. The hollow point rounds, as the judge would later note at sentencing, were designed for maximum internal damage on impact. Officers arrived at the condo and were met at the front door by Layne, who had come outside holding the Glock. She was ordered to put it down. She did. Then, according to testimony, she said, "I murdered my grandson." Officers followed a blood trail inside and up the stairs to the loft. Jonathan Hoffman was lying next to the couch. He was pronounced dead on arrival at the hospital. At the police station, Layne's account began shifting. Initially, she told an officer Jonathan had not hurt her. Later, she said he had kicked her in the stomach and she had feared for her life. That inconsistency did not go unnoticed at trial. Layne was arraigned on July 12, 2012, and charged with open murder, a charge structure that allowed the jury to return a verdict anywhere from first-degree premeditated murder to involuntary manslaughter, or to acquit on self-defense grounds. Her defense attorney, Jerome Sabota, built the case around Hoffman's drug use, his behavior, the prior 911 call Layne had made in March, and the argument that an elderly woman had feared for her life against a physically younger and chemically altered teenager. The trial opened at Oakland County Circuit Court in early March 2013. Prosecutor Paul Walton delivered the opening statement, walking the jury through the physical layout of the condo, the blood trail, the spent casings, and the 911 recording. He described finding Jonathan in the loft, 17 years old, 110 pounds, dying next to his couch. The jury heard the 911 tape. Jonathan's voice, his words to the dispatcher, and the sounds captured during the return shooting were played in court. During deliberations, jurors requested to hear the recording again. They played it multiple times. The prosecution leaned on the gap between the first shots, when Jonathan was already wounded, managed to get upstairs and made a phone call, and the shots that killed him. Time had passed. 3 minutes of documented space, at minimum, during which Layne could have left the condo, called police herself, or done nothing further. Instead, she went back. Walton told the court he had never handled a homicide, quote, "this cold, this long, and this calculating." On cross-examination, the prosecution got Layne to admit something directly. She said she had retrieved the gun and confronted Jonathan because she wanted him to listen. She wanted him to pay attention. She said she would not give him the car. She would not give him money. She said, quote, "he had to listen." Prosecutors used that statement to argue she had not been acting out of genuine fear, but out of a determination to control the situation, which, with a loaded Glock in her hands, she had done. Layne testified that she was desperate and didn't know what to do. She repeatedly returned to the argument that Jonathan's parents should have taken him back to Arizona. She said he was unmanageable for a woman her age. She said his drug use had made living with him impossible. She did not explain, to the jury's apparent satisfaction, why she went back up the stairs with the gun after he was already wounded and calling for help. The jury deliberated for approximately 8 hours across 2 days. On March 19, 2013, they returned a verdict of guilty on second-degree murder and guilty on the use of a firearm in the commission of a felony. They rejected first-degree murder, and they rejected self-defense. Sentencing took place on April 18, 2013, before Oakland County Circuit Court Judge Denise Langford Morris. At the hearing, Layne addressed the court sobbing, wearing orange jail clothes with belly chains and handcuffs on her slight frame. She said she was sorry. She said sorry was too small a word. She said if she could go back, she never would have bought the gun. She said she did not want to die in jail. Jonathan's mother, Jennifer, who was also his daughter-in-law from Layne's perspective, addressed the court. She said Layne had shown no mercy when she planned, stalked, and murdered her son in his bedroom, and that she was pure evil who would surely kill again if given the opportunity. Jonathan's father, Michael, did not attend the hearing. He was in Arizona with Jessica, who was still in treatment. He submitted a letter in which he said his daughter had a hole in her heart to match the hole in her head since her brother's death. He wrote that Layne had put on her war paint and came in gunning for his boy. Judge Langford Morris, before pronouncing sentence, addressed Layne directly. She asked why Layne had kept shooting. She noted that Layne hadn't been required to go back. She said grandmothers are supposed to protect. She pointed out the hollow point ammunition, rounds designed for a devastating impact, and asked how Layne had kept pulling the trigger. Layne did not provide an answer the judge found satisfying.
I tried to pick him up, and then just flopped in Michael's arms, so Michael's laid him on the floor.
Then it was fine all day because we took him shopping with us.
Right.
And he was fine, perfect.
Michael and Kerry Ives responded to initial police questions with a series of lies to cover up the horrific state of their grandson.
Ethan Ives Griffiths was 2 years and 3 months old when he was murdered. He had brown hair, a gap-toothed smile, and according to a developmental review carried out by a health visitor on the 7th of June, 2021, he could run confidently, jump 2 feet off the ground, string 2-word sentences together, and kick a large ball. He was described in court as chubby, healthy, right on track. 10 weeks later, he was dead. The people who killed him were his grandparents. Michael Ives, then 47, and Kerry Ives, then 46, both of Kingsley Road, Garden City, Deeside in Flintshire, North Wales. The person who watched it happen and did nothing was his mother, Shannon Ives, 28, living in the same house. All 3 were convicted in 2025 at Mold Crown Court, the grandparents for murder, Shannon for causing or allowing the death of a child. The case broke open because of cameras the family had installed themselves. A domestic CCTV system mounted in and around the home recorded, in real time, weeks of what the judge would later describe as gratuitous degradation and escalating violence against a toddler who weighed less than 10 kilograms on the night he died. Michael and Kerry Ives were not inexperienced parents. They had 9 children of their own, ranging in age from 9 to 24 at the time of the murder. Shannon was the oldest. By 24, she already had 4 children of her own. Ethan was her second youngest. His father, Will Griffiths, had been together with Shannon until a domestic dispute on the 9th of June, 2021, when Griffiths was arrested for aggressive behavior and banned from the family home as a bail condition. Shannon took her 3 youngest children, including Ethan, and moved first to one sister's flat, then another. Even before Ethan arrived at Kingsley Road, Shannon's treatment of the children was poor. At her sister's flat, she would not let them play with toys or watch television. She made them stand against the wall with their hands on their heads. She hit them. She didn't feed them properly. This is in the court record. Shannon also knew from personal experience that her own parents were capable of physically abusing children. She had grown up in their house. She gave evidence confirming she had seen both Michael and Kerry hit Ethan before he moved in with them. She sent him there anyway. On the 24th of June, 2021, Ethan was taken to Michael and Kerry's house to make life easier for Shannon and her sister. On the 6th of July, Ethan and his siblings were placed on the Child Protection Register by Flintshire County Council, requiring a welfare check every 10 days under Welsh law. That same week, Kerry told Shannon's adult sister that Ethan would need to be returned because after 3 weeks he was, in her words, still the same. The campaign to break his spirit, as the judge would later put it, was not working fast enough. On the 8th of July, Michael sent a text. It read, "Ethan needs to learn the hard way." By the 17th and 18th of July, Ethan had injuries to his lip. Kerry photographed them and texted the images to Shannon. The 2 women agreed he was naughty. Shannon moved herself and her other children into her parents' house shortly after. She knew what was happening to Ethan. She allowed it to continue. What was being done to him inside that house? Michael Ives was beating him. Kerry watched and encouraged. Shannon spent as much time as possible on her phone. Ethan was being starved. When he tried to rush the food placed in front of him, Michael physically removed it from his mouth. Both Kerry and Shannon supported this. Ethan was also being denied water. By the time he arrived at hospital, his dehydration was equivalent to 3 full days without any fluid. Pediatric nurses from Alder Hey, who had seen him as he lay dying, said they had never encountered anything like it in their careers. Several wept while giving evidence. The CCTV outside the house captured what happened during the rare times Ethan was allowed into the garden. On the 4th of August, he appeared walking with a wide, unstable gait, already showing visible signs of brain injury from earlier, unseen blows. He was placed on a trampoline, but could no longer keep his balance. His trousers fell down because of weight loss. For 45 minutes, Michael, Kerry, and Shannon watched from time to time while Ethan struggled on the trampoline. Shannon and Ethan's brother jumped beside him, causing him to lose balance further. A bigger child got on and made it worse. When Michael finally removed him, he grabbed Ethan by one arm and hauled him off. The prosecution described it as handling a rag doll or a bag of rubbish. Neither Kerry nor Shannon intervened. A few minutes later, Ethan was sent back. He had been conditioned, through repetition, to put his hands on top of his head as a gesture of submission. He sat on the trampoline in that position. Michael turned a garden hose on him. After that, Michael persuaded Ethan's 3-year-old brother to punch Ethan in the head while he sat there, hands on head, not moving. The younger child seemed reluctant and didn't apply much force. Michael took Ethan away roughly. Ethan was then kept inside the house for more than a week. On the 5th of August, a social worker arrived for a mandatory child protection visit. Kerry and Shannon kept him on the doorstep for 45 minutes, telling him Ethan was asleep. He was not asleep. The social worker eventually left without seeing Ethan. He tried to arrange further visits. Shannon ignored his calls, made excuses, or lied. On the 9th of August, she falsely claimed to be ill to cancel a social services core group meeting about her children. She texted a health visitor to say the children were fine. On the morning of the 12th of August, Ethan was allowed outside for the first time in over a week. As Michael put him into a car seat, he punched him twice in the stomach. The blows caused internal bleeding in 2 locations, concentrated around the duodenum. Michael and Kerry then drove to Tesco. They bought groceries. They were not concerned. Social services had made multiple attempts at a welfare visit by this point. Shannon agreed to attend a family center on the 13th of August with some of her children, but told the caseworker she would not bring Ethan because he wasn't well. She gave no indication of his actual condition. On the morning of the 13th, Michael subjected Ethan to another assault. He punched him in the head. The blow rendered Ethan unconscious for approximately 10 minutes. Kerry was not in the room, but was inside the house. Shannon was there too. Both became aware Ethan had been knocked out. Neither called an ambulance. Neither called a doctor. Shannon canceled her noon appointment with social services without disclosing what had happened. What Michael and Kerry did next was put Ethan in the car and drive him to a supermarket. Shannon went out separately. CCTV from that visit is part of the court record. It shows Ethan sitting inert in the shopping trolley seat, barely responding to anything around him. By that point, according to medical evidence presented at trial, he had very advanced brain damage. His walking had deteriorated further. When Kerry and Michael returned home, Michael mimicked Ethan's brain-damaged walk. Kerry and Shannon found it funny. Ethan's body weight was now below 10 kilograms. A healthy child of his age should have weighed approximately 13. He had abdominal bleeding. Older bleeds on the brain predating the 13th of August. A chipped tooth. A torn frenulum. Bruising to his face. Abrasions to his spine. 40 visible external injuries in total, found when doctors examined him at hospital. On the evening of Saturday, the 14th of August, 2021, Michael Ives killed Ethan Ives Griffiths. Kerry was sitting beside him on the sofa. Shannon was upstairs on a phone call with a man she had not previously met, a conversation lasting approximately 45 minutes. The judge's published sentencing remarks are explicit. Michael hit Ethan to the head and shook him violently. He caused retinal bleeding in both eyes, subdural bleeding in the brain and spine, and fatal brain swelling. The judge described the force as being at the severe end of the spectrum. Kerry watched. She smiled. She had smiled through it for weeks. The judge found she had intended Michael to do what he did. Ethan lost consciousness immediately. Michael and Kerry waited to see if he would come around. He did not. After several minutes, they called Shannon downstairs. For another 10 minutes, they tried to bring him round with water and fresh air. None of them called 999. The judge was direct about why. They did not care if Ethan was dying. They were worried about what would happen to them if someone found out. On the 16th of August, 2021, Ethan's life support machine was switched off at hospital. He had never regained consciousness. He was 2 years old. Michael and Kerry told the same story under oath. Nothing had happened before he collapsed. When medical evidence eliminated every accidental explanation, they tried to shift blame to Shannon. The phone records destroyed that theory. Shannon had been on a documented call for 45 minutes before her parents called her downstairs. The jury returned unanimous verdicts on the 15th of July, 2025, Michael and Kerry Ives guilty of murder and child cruelty. Shannon Ives guilty of causing or allowing the death of a child and child cruelty. At sentencing on the 3rd of October, 2025, Michael received life with a minimum of 23 years. Kerry received life with a minimum of 17. Shannon received 12. The presiding judge, Mr. Justice Griffiths, described Ethan in his opening remarks as a boy with an independent spirit who had laughed even when struck, who had been defiant even as a toddler. He said they decided to break him. Ethan would have turned 6 in 2025.
All right, guys, come on. Back up. Let's give him room, huh? Let's get him out of here.
Mr. Montalvo, what can you tell us about the murders?
Dorothea Puente was born Dorothy Helen Gray in Redlands, California on January 9, 1929. By the time she was operating her boarding house on F Street in Sacramento, she had been married multiple times, had served prison time for theft and drugging elderly victims, had forged checks, and had cultivated a public image as a community fixture. A white-haired, bespectacled woman in high-heeled pumps who donated food baskets to the needy and funded youth scholarships. She had deliberately let her hair go gray. She wore vintage clothing. She dressed for the role of a grandmother. None of it was accidental. The address was 1426 F Street, a Victorian house in a once fashionable neighborhood of downtown Sacramento, 2 blocks from the former governor's mansion. By the 1980s, the neighborhood had deteriorated. Nearby homes were boarded up or operating as flop houses. Puente moved there and opened a residential boarding house for the elderly, the disabled, and the mentally ill. Exactly the population nobody would miss and nobody would ask questions about. Her first documented killing came in 1982. Ruth Monroe, 61, was Puente's friend and informal business partner. She moved into Puente's apartment in April of that year. Within weeks, she was dead, a lethal combination of codeine and Tylenol. Police ruled it a suicide. Monroe's family believed otherwise and pressed for investigation. Nothing came of it. At roughly the same time, a 74-year-old man named Malcolm McKenzie accused Puente of drugging him and stealing his pension. She was charged, convicted of felony theft, and sentenced to 5 years. She served 3. During her sentence, she began exchanging letters with a 77-year-old man in Oregon named Everson Gilmouth. By the time she was released in 1985, the correspondence had become a relationship. Gilmouth moved to Sacramento to be with her. They planned to marry. They never did. In late 1985, Puente hired a handyman named Ismael Flores to do wood paneling work inside her home. She gave him Gilmouth's red 1980 Ford pickup truck, explaining that Gilmouth had given it to her and no longer needed it. She also paid Flores a cash bonus and asked him to build a 6-foot by 3-foot wooden box, telling him it was for books. Flores built it. He and Puente then drove the box to Sutter County and dumped it near the Sacramento River. On New Year's Day 1986, a fisherman found the box on the riverbank. There was a body inside. Investigators could not identify it. 3 years passed before the remains were connected to Gilmouth. During those 3 years, Puente was collecting his pension and writing letters to his family, signing Gilmouth's name. Between 1986 and 1988, she began taking in tenants at 1426 F Street. She ran a disciplined operation. Tenants signed over control of their Social Security and government benefit payments directly to her. She handled all finances. She told tenants she was managing their money on their behalf. A handwriting expert who testified at trial confirmed that Puente had signed the names of 7 dead tenants on 60 federal and state checks sent to that address in 1987 and 1988. She was netting approximately $5,000 a month from the forgeries. The tenants who died at 1426 F Street and were later found buried in the yard were Leona Carpenter, 78, described as a sick widow who died of drug overdose; Alvaro Bert Montoya, 51, a Costa Rican man with schizophrenia and developmental disabilities who spoke almost no English, called Puente Mama, and argued in Spanish with voices only he could hear; Dorothy Miller, 64, an American Indian woman with an alcohol problem who liked to recite poetry, whose arms were found taped to her chest with duct tape when her body was exhumed; Benjamin Fink, 55, an alcoholic found in striped boxer shorts; James Gallup, 62, Vera Faye Martin, 64, and Betty Palmer, 78. All died from 1986 to 1988. All had been drugged with Dalmane, a prescription sedative used for insomnia, which toxicologists found in all 7 of the exhumed bodies. Montoya had been placed with Puente in February 1988 by a social worker named Judy Moise. He was homeless, nearly silent, and described by Detective John Cabrera as having the demeanor of a child. Puente had a reputation in Sacramento's social services network as someone who would take difficult cases, tenants that other board and care facilities refused. She accepted alcoholics, the mentally ill, people with few family connections, and no one to advocate for them. Moise trusted her. She had sent tenants to Puente before. Through mid-1988, warnings surfaced. A woman named Brenda Trujillo, who had been incarcerated with Puente and had briefly lived at 1426 F Street, reported to police that Puente had drugged her and cashed her checks. Some accounts state she also told police that bodies were buried in the backyard. No action was taken. The complaint was filed and went nowhere. Puente continued operating. In late 1988, Montoya stopped showing up to his scheduled meetings with Moise. She contacted Puente, who gave inconsistent accounts of where he had gone. First that he had gone to stay with family, then other stories that didn't align. Puente had also tried a more elaborate cover. She paid a man named Donald Anthony, a halfway house resident, to call Moise's answering machine posing as Montoya's brother-in-law, claiming Montoya had gone to live with family out of state. Anthony left the message, but used his own name instead of the fictional brother-in-law's. That mistake ended the operation. Moise reported Montoya missing to Sacramento police. Detective John Cabrera and colleagues arrived at 1426 F Street on November 11, 1988, to conduct a welfare check. Puente answered the door. Cabrera, a seasoned homicide detective, later said he was taken aback. He saw a sweet grandmother. He was bewildered as he began talking to her. She was cooperative, charming, and offered him coffee. She permitted the officers to look around the property. While they were searching, one of the detectives noticed an area of recently disturbed soil in the yard. They began to dig. The first body came up on November 12th. Then more. Over 3 days, investigators exhumed 7 sets of remains from the yard of 1426 F Street. They were buried in multiple locations around the property. Montoya was found under a newly planted apricot tree in the side yard. Dorothy Miller was found with duct tape around her arms. The excavation ran from November 11th to November 14th. During those days, Puente remained at the property, making coffee, watching the digging, speaking to officers and neighbors with consistent calm. She told a neighbor she had lived a good life and would not be held responsible for whatever was in that yard. On November 12th, while officers were still on site, Puente asked Detective Cabrera if she could walk to a nearby hotel to have breakfast. She was not yet formally a suspect. The case was being treated as a missing persons investigation, and officers had no grounds to detain her. He let her go. She took a bus to Los Angeles. She checked into a motel in Stockton. She then moved on to a bar in Los Angeles. At the bar, she struck up a conversation with an elderly man named Charles Wilkes. He recognized her face from news broadcasts that were already running. He called police. She was arrested on November 16, 1988 at the bar. Her comment to reporters on the way back to Sacramento: "I used to be a very good person at one time." She was arraigned on November 17th, charged initially with 1 count of murder, Alvaro Montoya. In March 1989, she was charged with 8 additional murders, for a total of 9. Monroe, Gilmouth, Carpenter, Montoya, Miller, Fink, Gallup, Martin, and Palmer. 2 of those, Monroe and Gilmouth, had not been found in the yard. Monroe's death predated 1426 F Street, and Gilmouth's body had been found in the box near the river. The trial was a significant logistical undertaking. A change of venue was granted in 1990 due to the extent of the Sacramento coverage. Trial moved to Monterey County. It opened in November 1992 and ran for 8 months. The prosecution called more than 130 witnesses. The defense argued that Puente was a thief but not a murderer, that the tenants had died of natural causes or self-inflicted overdoses, and that she had simply taken advantage of the situation financially. Pathologists testified they could not definitively establish cause of death for any of the 7 bodies from the yard, primarily because decomposition had advanced too far. But Dalmane flurazepam, a powerful sedative Puente was prescribed, was present in all 7 sets of remains. The prosecution argued she had drugged them, then suffocated them, then paid other tenants and workers to help her bury them. Puente maintained her innocence throughout. She told the court she was a charitable woman who had been wrongly accused. She never acknowledged the killings. After 24 days of deliberation, the jury returned its verdict on August 26, 1993. Guilty of first-degree murder for Dorothy Miller. Guilty of first-degree murder for Benjamin Fink. Guilty of second-degree murder for Leona Carpenter. The jury deadlocked on the remaining 6 murder counts. Those charges were never retried. She was sentenced to 2 consecutive life terms without the possibility of parole. She was transferred to the Central California Women's Facility in Chowchilla. She remained there, continuing to deny any involvement in the killings, until her death on March 27, 2011. She was 82 years old. She had spent the last 23 years of her life in prison. The house at 1426 F Street still stands. It has changed hands and been renovated. The neighborhood has been partially gentrified. The apricot tree that Puente planted over Alvaro Montoya's body is gone. Blooming Prairie, Minnesota, has about 2,000 people. It has a Dairy Queen, a historic district, and a slogan on the city website: a great place to spend the next 100 years. It is the kind of town where a business partner notices when his co-owner hasn't shown up for work in 2 weeks. That is why David Riess's body was found on March 23, 2018. His partner requested a welfare check. Officers went to the couple's home on the Prairie Waxworm Farm and found David, 54, shot multiple times in the bathroom. A blanket had been placed over him. His wife Lois, 56, was gone. So was their white Cadillac Escalade. David Riess had served in the U.S. Navy, run a bait shop, and then opened the worm farm with a business partner on the same property where the couple lived. He and Lois had been married 26 years. They had 3 children together, Bill, Braden, and Bria, and 5 grandchildren. Lois ran a daycare out of their home. They ate lunch regularly at the local servicemen's club. Neighbors who knew them described the Riesses as a visible, social couple. Nobody who knew them imagined a murder. Behind that picture, Lois Riess had a gambling addiction that had been escalating for years. Their son Braden would later tell Inside Edition that his mother had struggled with it and that it had destroyed things. A 2015 investigation by local authorities found evidence she had stolen money from her disabled sister. She was never criminally charged, but a 2017 civil judgment found she owed her sister $100,000. According to reporting by The Atavist, David Riess was aware of his wife's gambling habit, and the final break came when Lois took money the couple had set aside to buy a new vehicle and gambled it away at a casino. He told her he was cutting her off. That, according to investigators familiar with the case, is likely where the calculus shifted. Lois later told a Minnesota court that she killed David on March 11, 2018, 12 days before his body was discovered during a fight. The medical examiner found multiple gunshot wounds to the chest. He had been killed with a .22 caliber handgun. After shooting him, Lois covered his body with a blanket in the bathroom. She forged checks from his business account, depositing over $9,000 into her own account. She took the Cadillac Escalade. She drove south. Surveillance cameras at a come-and-go convenience store in Iowa picked her up shortly after. She was wearing a striped gray cardigan, buying a sandwich, asking the employee behind the counter whether she should take Interstate 35 South to keep going to the next state. On the same day, she turned up at Diamond Joe's Casino in Iowa. Investigators later found hand-drawn maps in her abandoned car, tracing a route from Blooming Prairie all the way to Fort Myers Beach, Florida. She stopped at multiple casinos as she drove. She cashed the stolen checks along the way. By the time Dodge County authorities issued a public alert with her photograph, warning people she was armed and dangerous, she had already crossed into Florida. She arrived in Fort Myers Beach in early April. She checked into a motel. She started frequenting local bars. She had adopted the alias Stormy Liberty. According to investigators, she also began spending time near the Fort Myers Beach home of acquaintances from Blooming Prairie, Rod and Teresa Coster, who wintered there. She did not contact them. She was not there to reconnect. What investigators believe she was doing was observing. On April 4, 2018, surveillance video at the Village Marina Resort captured Lois Riess talking to a woman at a bar. The woman was Pamela Hutchinson, 59, from Bradenton, Florida, who was staying at a timeshare at the Smuggler's Cove Resort on Fort Myers Beach. Hutchinson and Riess shared similar physical characteristics, comparable height and build, similar hair color. Prosecutors argued that Riess selected Hutchinson on that basis. She needed a new identity to stay ahead of law enforcement. She needed someone who looked enough like her to pass. Over the following 3 days, the two women spent time together. Surveillance footage documented multiple interactions. They were seen walking together back to Hutchinson's unit. Riess, per the evidence, was building enough of a relationship to gain access to the condo. On April 8, 2018, Pamela Hutchinson was found shot to death inside her unit at Smuggler's Cove Resort. She had been shot once in the heart. The weapon was a .22 caliber handgun, the same caliber used to kill David Riess in Blooming Prairie. Hutchinson's body was found in the bathroom. It had been positioned under a towel. The air conditioning in the unit had been turned all the way down, which investigators recognized as a deliberate attempt to slow decomposition and mask the smell. There were no signs of a struggle. There was no murder weapon. Riess left Fort Myers Beach in Hutchinson's white Acura TL. Before leaving, she stopped at a Wells Fargo branch where she used Hutchinson's identification to withdraw $5,000 in cash. She then used Hutchinson's credit cards for hotel stays and continued spending as she moved west through the South. She was gambling again, using Hutchinson's identity as cover at each stop. Lee County Sheriff's detectives released surveillance footage and connected the two cases. By mid-April 2018, federal and state law enforcement agencies had joined the search. The U.S. Marshals North Star Fugitive Task Force was involved. Riess's photograph was circulating nationally. CBS This Morning ran the story. She had been on the run for approximately 5 weeks total, 4 from Minnesota and nearly 2 from Fort Myers Beach. On April 19, 2018, George Higginbotham, the manager of Dirty Ale's restaurant and bar on South Padre Island, Texas, a resort island near the Mexican border, recognized the woman sitting at his bar from the CBS This Morning broadcast. He called the U.S. Marshals. Agents arrived at the bar and arrested Lois Riess without incident. She had Hutchinson's credit cards on her. The Acura was nearby. She was 30 miles from the Mexican border. She was extradited to Florida and made her first court appearance in May 2018. Florida moved forward with the Hutchinson murder charges first, since that investigation was further along. In December 2019, Riess changed her plea to guilty. She received a life sentence without the possibility of parole in Lee County for the murder of Pamela Hutchinson. She was extradited back to Minnesota in August 2020. A grand jury had indicted her in May 2019 on 1 count of first-degree premeditated murder and 1 count of second-degree murder in the death of David Riess, along with theft charges for the forged checks. Riess initially pleaded not guilty. She changed that plea to guilty on August 11, 2020. The hearing was held in a Dodge County High School auditorium, used because of both public interest in the case and COVID-19 restrictions on courthouse capacity. She accepted a second life sentence without the possibility of parole. During victim impact statements at that hearing, her daughter Brianna Riess said, "I cycle between anger, regret, and sadness. March 11, 2018 was the last time I hugged my dad and told him I loved him." Forensic psychologist Dave Thomas, speaking to the Fort Myers News Press in 2018, described what he believed was Riess's mental state at the time of the murders. A gambling addiction so advanced it had become the organizing principle of her life. He used the term fiending, the state of a person so chemically or psychologically dependent on a substance or behavior that the need overrides everything else. Broke, cut off by her husband, with a civil judgment against her and no legal means of income, she was out of options that didn't require her to stop gambling. She didn't stop gambling. She killed her husband instead, took what was left of his money, and drove south toward the next casino. The selection of Pamela Hutchinson was, in that context, instrumental. Hutchinson was not known to Riess. She was not chosen out of anger or for any personal reason. She was chosen because she was approximately the same size and coloring as Riess, was staying alone at a resort, and had a car, an identity, and access to cash. The .22 caliber pistol used to kill both David Riess and Pamela Hutchinson was the same weapon, or at minimum the same caliber, and likely the same gun based on ballistic analysis. Riess carried it across state lines, used it twice, and disposed of it before her arrest. It was never recovered. In 2024, HBO aired the documentary series I Am Not a Monster, The Lois Riess Murders, directed by Aaron Lee Carr. For the first time, Riess agreed to be interviewed from prison. The documentary provided no clear answers about why she killed, though Riess claimed a history of abuse in her marriage with David, a claim investigators found no corroborating evidence to support. There was no documented history of domestic violence reports, no evidence of an affair, and forensic psychologist Tricia Aiken, speaking to the Atavist, noted that Riess doesn't fit a recognizable criminal profile because women who kill in this manner are rare enough that no sufficient comparison population exists. Lois Riess is serving 2 life sentences without parole at Lowell Correctional Institution in Florida. Pamela Hutchinson had done nothing except share a physical resemblance with a woman who needed a new identity. David Riess had done nothing except cut her off. Both were shot with the same handgun, left in bathrooms with the temperature turned down, and not reported. The gun was never recovered. In 36 days, March 11th to April 19th, 2018, Riess killed twice, crossed 3 states, and came 30 miles from the Mexican border. She was caught because a bar manager recognized her from morning television and called the marshals.